The damp chill of the November air, thick with the scent of decaying leaves and the distant metallic tang of the city's breath, always seemed to settle deepest in my bones when I stood here. My window, a warped pane of glass in the skeletal frame of my inherited shack, offered no solace, just the skeletal branches of an oak, clawing at a sky bruised purple, and beyond it, the faint, shimmering glow of another world. Her world. Across the valley, nestled among ancient whispering pines and manicured frost-rimmed lawns, stood Blackwood Manor. It wasn't just a house, it was a leviathan, an architectural beast born of stone and dark timber, sprawling across the hillside like a slumbering titan. Even from this distance, its presence was suffocating. Its windows, unblinking eyes set deep in its formidable facade, seemed to watch, to judge, to remember every indiscretion, every whisper of impurity. And I, perched on the precipice of its formidable shadow, felt the weight of its gaze most acutely. My name is Elias Thorne, a name like a dull blade, quickly forgotten. My hands, calloused and rough from years of honest, brutal labor, were a stark contrast to the delicate porcelain of hers. My worn clothes, perpetually smelling of dust and pine resin, against the whisper of silk and the shimmer of jewels that adorned her. She was a creature of light and air, born of the very essence of Blackwood itself, yet she had found her way to me, a moth drawn to a guttering flame. Or perhaps I was the moth, ceaseless encircling her terrifying, brilliant warmth. Her name was Isidult. The sound of it, even in the hollow chambers of my own mind, was a melody and a dirge all at once. Isidult. It evoked the rustle of autumn leaves underfoot, the ghost of a forgotten perfume, the fragile crystalline beauty of frost on a window pane. It was a name that promised both salvation and an exquisite, agonizing doom. The first time I saw her, I was mending a fence on Old Manfred's property, not 3 miles from the manor gates. She was riding, a vision in dark velvet, atop a mare the color of polished mahogany. Her hair, the precise shade of moonlight on new snow, cascaded down her back, catching the pale sun. Her eyes, I remember, were like pools of shadowed amethyst, deep and ancient, holding a sorrow that seemed too vast for her delicate frame. She halted the mare, her gaze falling upon me with an unnerving intensity, as if she were seeing not just a man, but an entire unwritten history. A shiver, not entirely of cold, traced its way down my spine. It felt less like an encounter and more like a premonition. We spoke then, a few hesitant words about the weather, about the bridle of her horse. Her voice, soft as a winter breeze through bare branches, carried a faint echo, as if it had been perfected in the vast, empty halls of her home. There was an innocence about her, yes, but also a profound weariness, a knowledge of burdens I couldn't yet fathom. And in that moment, something shifted within me. The world, which had always been a bleak, predictable landscape of hard labor and quiet solitude, suddenly fractured. A fissure opened, and through it, I saw a glimpse of something terrible and beautiful. Our meetings became clandestine rituals. The abandoned boathouse by the lake, shrouded by weeping willows that dipped their ancient boughs into the dark water, became our sanctuary. The air there always felt heavy, charged with unspoken things, the silence broken only by the drip of water and the frantic beat of my own heart. I remember the scent of the place, damp earth, decaying wood, and always, faintly, her delicate, expensive perfume, a stark contrast that only deepened the sense of our forbidden union. She would arrive, a spectral presence in the twilight, her face illuminated by the fragile glow of a moonbeam or the distant, mocking lights of Blackwood. We would talk, or sometimes just sit in silence, her hand in mine, her touch a searing brand against my callous skin. She spoke of her world in hushed tones, a world of grand ballrooms and echoing corridors, of ancestral portraits whose eyes seemed to follow her, of silent expectations and unspoken rules. Her words painted a picture not of privilege, but of a gilded cage, each ornate bar meticulously crafted by generations of wealth and power. My own words were clumsy, rough-hewn. I told her of my days, of the land, of the biting wind and the unforgiving soil. I laid bare my poverty, my lack of lineage, my profound unworthiness. And with each confession, she would squeeze my hand tighter, her amethyst eyes searching mine, a strange, desperate tenderness softening to ancient sorrow. "You are more real than any of them, Elias," she once whispered, her breath warm against my ear, sending tremors through my entire being. "More real than my own reflection." Her family. They were never spoken of directly, not by their names, but always as them, a monolithic, omnipresent force that hovered over her like a dark cloud. I saw their shadows in her eyes when she spoke of her obligations, in the subtle tension of her shoulders, in the way she sometimes flinched at a sudden noise, as if expecting a reprimand. They were the architects of Blackwood, the keepers of its secrets, and I knew, with a primal certainty, that I was anathema to everything they represented. The manor itself seemed to pulse with their disapproval. On moonless nights, its silhouette against the sky was particularly menacing, a hulking beast ready to devour. I imagined their cold, calculating eyes behind those curtained windows, their silent pronouncements of my inadequacy. The air around Blackwood felt thin, sharp, infused with an almost tangible contempt for anything that dared to exist outside its carefully constructed boundaries. It was a place where love, especially a love like ours, could not breathe. My love for Isolde became less of a gentle affection and more of a consuming fever, a relentless possession. It rooted itself in the deepest, darkest corners of my being, twining around my very essence like a parasitic vine. It was beautiful, yes, but also terrifying in its intensity. It burned away my solitude, leaving behind a hollow ache that only her presence could fill. Without her, I felt like a ghost, a half-formed thing, drifting through a world drained of color. I began to see her everywhere, in the mist that clung to the valleys at dawn, in the way the candlelight flickered in my shack, in the silence that stretched between the ticks of my grandmother's old clock. Her absence was a constant, gnawing presence, a phantom limb that throbbed with unceasing pain. My fear of losing her became a living entity within me, a cold, scaled creature that coiled itself around my heart, tightening its grip with every passing day. I knew the chasm between us was vast, carved not just by wealth, but by generations of unspoken expectations, by a lineage that stretched back further than my own family tree had roots. I was nothing, a speck of dust against the marble grandeur of her world, and yet she chose me, or so I believed. This belief, fragile as spun glass, was both my greatest joy and my most profound torment. Because if she chose me, what would it cost her? And what would it cost me to keep her? One evening, as we sat in the boathouse, the air heavy with the scent of stagnant water and our desperate longing, a tremor passed through her. She was speaking of a dinner, a gathering of her family's associates, men and women whose names echoed with power and influence. Her voice grew fainter, her eyes distant, clouded with a familiar, weary dread. "They spoke of my future, Elias," she whispered, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on my palm, "of arrangements, of a suitable match." Her gaze lifted to mine then, a plea and an apology warring in their depths. "My father, he says it is my duty. My mother, she says it is for my own good." My blood ran cold. The creature in my chest, the fear, began to stir, its scales rasping against my ribs. This was it, the beginning of the end. The subtle disapproval of Blackwood, the unseen pressure, was finally taking form, coalescing into a tangible threat. I saw the shadow of the manor, not on the hillside, but in her eyes, in the tremble of her lips. It was reaching for her, pulling her back into its dark embrace. A sudden gust of wind rattled the boathouse door, a sharp, mournful moan that sounded like a lament. The old structure groaned as if in protest. Outside, the willows thrashed wildly, their long branches like spectral arms grasping at the night. The lake water, usually so still and dark, churned with a sudden, unseen current. Isolde recoiled slightly, her hand gripping mine with a desperate strength. Her face was pale in the dim light, her eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own. It wasn't just the wind, it was the world closing in, her world, hissing its disapproval. I pulled her closer, my arms wrapping around her delicate frame, trying to shield her from the unseen forces that sought to tear us apart. But even as I held her, I felt it, a profound, bone-deep cold, emanating not from the stormy night, but from the very core of my being. My love, once a beacon, now felt like a desperate, futile struggle against an insurmountable tide. And in that moment, under the watchful, indifferent eyes of the churning wake and the looming, silent manor, I understood. Our love was not a bloom in the sun, but a fragile, cursed flower growing in the shadow of a monolithic tomb, destined to wither and crumble, leaving only a lingering scent of despair. "Suitable match" echoed in the boathouse long after the wind had died down, long after she had pressed a fleeting kiss to my cheek and vanished into the encroaching night. They were not merely words, they were harbingers, omens carried on the chill breath of Blackwood Manor, slowly suffocating the fragile air around us. The creature in my chest, the cold, scaled fear, no longer merely coiled, it began to thrash, its icy grip tightening around my heart, squeezing the very breath from my lungs. Sleep became a mockery, a restless parade of half-dreams, where Isolde's face, pale and distant, floated just out of reach, always pulled away by invisible, powerful hands. I would wake in the pre-dawn dark, drenched in a cold sweat, the silence of my shack amplified, each creak of the old wood sounding like a mocking whisper from the manor across the valley. My days, once filled with the rhythm of labor, now felt hollow, punctuated by an obsessive vigilance. Every car that passed on the distant road, every shadow that lengthened with the setting sun, seemed to carry a message, a threat. I found myself staring for hours at Blackwood, its formidable silhouette a constant presence, its unblinking windows now feeling less like eyes and more like portals to a dimension of cold, calculating power. I imagined them inside, Isolde's family, moving through their opulent halls, their voices low and resonant, orchestrating my demise with the detached precision of grandmasters playing a grim game. I was merely a pawn, an inconvenient smudge on their pristine tapestry. The first tangible sign came, not with a roar, but with a subtle shift in the air. Isolde missed our next scheduled meeting, then the one after that. My anxiety, already a raw wound, began to fester. I walked to the boathouse each time, the path feeling longer, the air thicker with an ominous silence. The willows, usually our silent confederates, seemed to weep more profoundly, their branches dragging across the damp earth like mournful shrouds. The abandoned boat, a relic of forgotten leisure, now seemed a tomb. I would wait, the cold seeping into my bones until the last vestige of twilight had surrendered to the inky blackness, then walk home, each step a leaden weight of despair. When she finally appeared, nearly 2 weeks later, the change in her was stark. Her usual spectral grace was now overlaid with a profound exhaustion.
Her eyes, those deep amethyst pools, were shadowed, her lips pressed into a thin, weary line. She moved with a hesitant, almost fragile gait, as if the very air around her had become resistant. "Elias," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle lap of the lake. She collapsed onto the mildew bench, pulling her cloak tighter around her, though the air was not particularly cold. "They know." The words struck me like a physical blow, yet they merely confirmed what my fear had already screamed. "How?" I managed, my voice a rough croak. She shook her head, a tremor running through her. "I don't know. Perhaps a servant saw. Perhaps my mother simply sensed it. She has a way." Her gaze met mine, filled with a raw, desperate pain. They confronted me, not with anger, not at first, with disappointment, with pity. Pity. The word was a venomous dart, piercing deeper than any insult. It wasn't pity for her, not truly. It was pity for her poor judgment, for her inexplicable dalliance with someone like me. And it was pity for me, for my pathetic presumption, my audacity to even breathe the same air as their daughter. "They've been very watchful," she continued, her voice growing fainter. "My father has doubled the security on the estate. My mother insists I take tea with her every afternoon, discussing my future obligations. They speak of the family legacy, of the responsibilities that come with my name. They never mention you, Elias, not directly, but every word is a wall built between us." My hands clenched into fists, the nails digging into my palms. I could feel the cold, stony disapproval of Blackwood radiating across the valley, now finding purchase within the very walls of my sanctuary. The boathouse, once our haven, felt tainted, its shadow suddenly less comforting, more like hiding places for unseen watchers. "They've introduced me to Lord Alistair," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, her eyes fixed on the dark water. "He's a family friend, a distant relative actually, very powerful, very wealthy. My father says he's a perfect match." Lord Alistair, the name, even unspoken, had been a phantom dread for weeks. Now it was a concrete, terrifying rival. My heart seized, a bitter, corrosive jealousy erupting within me. I imagined him, refined, elegant, radiating the confidence of generations of privilege, everything I was not. He would be able to give her the world she was born to, a world I could only watch from the periphery. He would be able to protect her from her family, to appease them. He was not a guttering flame, but a magnificent, blazing hearth. Do you like him?" The question clawed its way out of my throat, laced with an ugly fear. She looked up, her expression a fragile mask of pain. "Elias, please, you know how I feel." But even as she said it, her gaze drifted, her shoulders hunched. The unspoken hung heavy in the air. What does it matter how I feel? This was the first taste of their true power, not a direct attack, but a slow, insidious erosion, wearing down her resistance, subtly pushing her towards a future I could not be a part of. And I, helpless, could only watch as the chasm between us widened. The family's tactics became bolder, more personal. One afternoon, a sleek black car,
far too expensive for this forgotten corner of the world, pulled up to my shack. A man, impeccably dressed, with eyes as cold and flat as river stones, emerged. He introduced himself as Mr. Abernathy, legal counsel for the Blackwood family. He didn't threaten me, not with words anyway. He merely laid out a proposition, a substantial sum of money, enough to buy a small farm, to start a new life far from this valley, a clean break, no questions asked. His voice was smooth, devoid of emotion, yet each word was a carefully aimed arrow, striking at my deepest insecurities. "They are concerned for Miss Isidol's well-being, Mr. Thorne," he had said, his gaze sweeping over my humble home with an almost imperceptible curl of his lip. "Her future is of paramount importance. Your association with her is, regrettably, not conducive to that future." Humiliation, that was the weapon. He didn't need to call me poor or unworthy. His very presence, his offer, his disdainful glance screamed it. The money was not a gift. It was a payment for my disappearance, an acknowledgement of my disposability. My blood boiled, a hot, impotent rage, but I held my tongue. To lash out would only confirm their assumptions about my crude nature. "I won't take their money," I said, my voice strained but steady. Abernathy merely smiled, a thin, humorless curve of his lips. "As you wish, Mr. Thorne, but understand this. The Blackwood family is exceedingly protective, and they are exceedingly patient. Miss Isidol's happiness, in their view, is a matter of securing her future."
One way or another. He left then, the black car vanishing down the winding road, leaving behind a lingering scent of expensive leather and an even more pervasive aura of menace. The encounter left me shaken, not just by the direct threat, but by the chilling realization of their absolute control. They didn't need to dirty their hands. They had proxies, an army of well-paid enforcers who could weave intricate webs of influence and intimidation. My world, already small, began to shrink further, feeling less like a refuge and more like a cage. Isolde, meanwhile, was slowly being consumed by their machinations. She grew thinner, her spirit dimmer. Her rare visits to the boathouse became desperate, furtive acts, fraught with a new kind of terror. She spoke of the relentless scrutiny, the constant surveillance. Her phone calls were monitored, her outings chaperoned. Lord Alistair, she confessed, was a frequent visitor to the manor, his presence a heavy, suffocating blanket. "He's kind, Elias," she admitted one evening, her eyes downcast, her voice laced with an unbearable guilt. "He speaks of art and literature, of places I've only read about. My father praises his intelligence, his ambition. My mother, she says I would want for nothing." My jealousy flared, a searing emerald green fire in my gut. "And you, Isolde? What do you want?" She flinched, as if I had struck her. I want to breathe, Elias. I want to choose, but they make it so hard. They speak of shame, of scandal, of what this would do to the family name." Her voice cracked. "They say I am tearing them apart." Her words twisted the knife in my heart. They weren't just attacking me. They were using her against herself. They were painting our love as a destructive force, a blight on her pristine family. My own self-worth, already tenuous, crumbled further. Was I truly so selfish, so destructive, to inflict this pain upon her? The thought was a poison, seeping into every corner of my mind. My love, once a source of strength, was now a source of profound torment, an addiction that left me craving a fix, even as it devoured my soul. One bitterly cold evening, a week before Christmas, Isolde appeared at the boathouse, not in her usual dark attire, but in a shimmering gown of midnight blue,
adorned with diamonds that sparkled like frozen tears. Her hair was swept up, meticulously styled, and she smelled of a rich, unfamiliar perfume.
She looked magnificent, ethereal, and utterly out of place in our crumbling sanctuary. She looked like she had just stepped out of Blackwood Manor, a piece of its oppressive grandeur clinging to her. "They are hosting their annual winter gala tonight," she explained, her voice flat, devoid of its usual soft melody. I slipped away. Just for a moment. She sat beside me, her elegant dress a stark contrast to my rough work clothes. The diamonds on her neck and wrists felt like shackles. Her skin was cold. "Lord Alistair, he escorted me," she continued, her gaze fixed on the dark, reflective surface of the lake. My father announced our engagement. The air left my lungs in a ragged gasp. The creature in my chest didn't just thrash, it tore, ripped, leaving a gaping, bleeding void. Engagement. The word was a final, irrefutable decree, a death knell for all my desperate hopes. It wasn't just a suitable match anymore, it was a public declaration, an irreversible step. I couldn't speak. The world spun, the boathouse tilting precariously around me. The scent of her expensive perfume, once a comfort, now felt cloying, suffocating, a cruel reminder of the world that was pulling her away. "I tried Elias," she whispered, her voice breaking, tears finally spilling down her pale cheeks, leaving tracks through her carefully applied makeup. "I tried to say no, but my mother, she became ill. My father threatened financial ruin for some of my uncle's ventures, things that rely on his goodwill. They said I was being selfish, that I was destroying everything." She turned to me then, her eyes pleading, ravaged by guilt and despair. What could I do? What choice did I have? Her question hung in the frigid air, heavy and unanswerable. My own throat was constricted, a raw, burning knot of agony. I looked at her, so beautiful, so broken, so utterly trapped, and I looked at my own calloused hands, so inadequate, so powerless against the monolithic force that was her family. The boathouse, with its dripping water and creaking timbers, suddenly felt like a tomb. The darkness outside pressed in, thick and suffocating. I wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice, against the cruel hand of fate that had brought us together only to tear us apart. But all that escaped me was a choked sob. She reached out, her diamond-laden fingers brushing my cheek. Her touch was cold, distant, like the first touch of winter. "I have to go back, Elias. They'll notice I'm gone." Her voice was a fragile whisper, a ghost of the melody I once adored. As she rose, her gown shimmering in the faint light, she seemed to recede, already becoming part of the grand, terrifying edifice she belonged to. "Don't forget me, Elias," she pleaded, her eyes wide, glistening with unshed tears. "Please, don't forget." And then she was gone, a fleeting shadow against the dark woods, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence. The scent of her perfume lingered, a haunting phantom. The chill that emanated from me, from the gaping wound in my chest, was profound. It wasn't just fear now. It was a crushing, soul-deep despair. Her words, "What choice did I have?" echoed, twisting into an accusation. Had I truly been so blind, so selfish? Was my love nothing more than a burden, a chain around her delicate neck? The creature in my chest had not only torn my heart, it had begun to consume my very identity, leaving behind only the hollow, echoing question: what am I without her? And what hope remains for a love that has been so ruthlessly, so publicly condemned? The night pressed in, thick and suffocating,
And for the first time, the darkness felt less like a shroud and more like a final resting place.
The weeping willows, the dark, stagnant water, the mildewed bench where we had shared stolen moments, it all festered in my memory, a testament to a love now entombed. The very air around my shack felt heavy, thick with the unsaid, the undone. I imagined her family's triumph, a quiet, almost imperceptible celebration of their victory, their carefully orchestrated separation. My poverty, my humble origins, had not merely been an inconvenience. They had been a weapon, wielded with surgical precision, to carve an insurmountable chasm between us. The letters started appearing a few weeks after her engagement announcement. Not from Isolde, not directly. They were elegant, embossed envelopes, delivered by a silent, stern-faced messenger who left them on my porch without a word, vanishing as quickly as he arrived. Inside, the messages were curt, formal, yet each word was a calculated stab. The first was an invitation to the engagement party of Isolde Blackwood and Lord Alistair Thorne. No, not Thorne, but Thorne Alistair, as his family name was hyphenated. A subtle, chilling irony. The invitation was a deliberate act of cruelty, designed to twist the knife, to force me to acknowledge my absolute exclusion. I imagined them, her family, sitting in their grand drawing room, crafting this exquisite torture, knowing it would find its way to me. The paper itself, thick and creamy, felt tainted, like a cursed artifact. I burned it in my hearth, watching the elegant script curl and blacken, but the image of it, the names, the date, were seared into my mind. Then came the photographs, not sent through the mail, but left on my porch, tucked under a stone. Glossy, professional images from the engagement party. Isolde, breathtakingly beautiful, smiling a brittle, painted smile, her hand resting on Lord Alistair's arm. He was everything I had imagined, tall, impeccably dressed, with a confident, almost possessive air. In one photograph, Isolde looked directly into the camera, and for a fleeting, agonizing second, I thought I saw a flicker of her old sorrow, a desperate plea hidden in the depths of her amethyst eyes. But then the light shifted, or my own agony warped the image, and it was gone, replaced by the polite, distant smile of a woman fulfilling her duty. These photographs were not just pictures. They were talismans of their power, proof of my replacement. They were meant to break me, to force me to accept the inevitable. And they were succeeding. The creature in my chest, the fear and despair, now had 1,000 eyes, watching me from every shadow, whispering her name, twisting every memory. My nights became a living hell. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling. The silence of my shack amplified, filled with the ghosts of her laughter, her whispered confessions. Sometimes I would glimpse her, a fleeting shadow at my window, her face pale and indistinct, then gone,
a trick of the moonlight and my tormented mind. The very air in my room felt thin, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in, trapping me in my own despair. I started to drink, not heavily, not at first, just enough to dull the edges, to quiet the relentless clamor in my head. But the whiskey only offered a temporary reprieve. The silence would return, heavier, darker, and Isolde's face, her broken plea, would surface with renewed intensity. The taste of the liquor, acrid and burning, became a constant companion, a desperate attempt to cauterize the gaping wound in my soul. My obsession deepened, becoming a consuming madness. I would walk the perimeter of the Blackwood estate, a shadow among shadows, drawn by an invisible, irresistible force. The towering stone walls, the intricate wrought iron gates, the watchful security cameras, they were not deterrents, but taunts. I would hide among the ancient pines, the sharp needles biting into my skin, and watch the manor. Its windows, usually dark and unblinking, now glowed with an internal light, hinting at a life of warmth and luxury that was forever denied to me. I imagined Isolde inside, a prisoner in her own home, moving through the gilded rooms, her laughter forced, her smile a lie. One evening, I saw her through a brightly lit window. She was in a grand ballroom, dancing with Lord Alistair. Her movements were fluid, graceful, a perfect performance. She wore another exquisite gown, sparkling under the chandeliers. Her head was thrown back in laughter, a sound I couldn't hear, a sound that felt alien to the Isolde I knew. For a horrifying moment, I doubted everything. Had her love been a fantasy, a fleeting distraction for a woman too sheltered, too bored? Had I merely been a curiosity, a temporary rebellion against her gilded cage? The thought was a chilling, corrosive acid that burned away the last vestiges of my hope. The air around me, in the shadows of the pines, felt colder than usual, sharper.
The wind sighing through the branches seemed to carry her laughter, twisted into a mocking chorus. I felt exposed, vulnerable, a pathetic, desperate figure clinging to the edge of a world that had no place for him. A shiver, colder than any winter chill, ran through me. It was not just the cold of the night, but the cold of utter desolation. I began to question everything. Was my love for her pure, or had it become an addiction, a self-destructive obsession? Was I truly fighting for her, or merely for the idealized version of her that existed only in my mind, a balm for my own profound insecurities? Her family's accusations that I was selfish, that I was tearing them apart, began to echo with a horrifying resonance. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps my love, rooted in my own poverty and feelings of unworthiness, was inherently toxic, a selfish need to possess something so beautiful, so unattainable. The horror wasn't just in the loss of her, but in the insidious doubt that was consuming my perception of myself, of our love. It was a psychological torment, a slow, agonizing unraveling of my very identity. Without her, without the hope of our love, who was Elias Thorne? A hollow man, a ghost haunting the edges of someone else's life. Then came the wedding invitations, identical to the engagement invitations, but now announcing the date, the venue, Blackwood Manor itself, and the names, Isolde Blackwood and Lord Alistair Thorne Alistair. The ceremony was to be in early spring, a time of rebirth, a cruel irony for a love that felt utterly dead. This invitation was the final blow. It was not a plea, not a threat, but a definitive, absolute end. They were not just separating us, they were erasing me from her future, sealing her fate, turning her into a possession of their world. The paper felt like a shroud, the elegant script like epitaphs. I didn't burn this one. I held it, tracing the letters of her name,
the contours of her new hyphenated future. A tremor ran through me, not of cold, but a profound internal earthquake. Something broke inside me then, a final, fragile tether. The despair, which had been a heavy, suffocating blanket, suddenly transmuted into something sharper, colder, more terrifying. A new thought began to fester, a dark, insidious seed planted by the constant torment. What if I couldn't let her go? What if her choice, her duty, was merely a surrender, and I was the only one left to fight for the love we had shared?
The line between genuine love and destructive obsession blurred, then vanished entirely. I started to see the world through a new lens, a warped, distorted perspective. Every whisper of the wind, every creak of my shack, every shadow cast by the ancient oak seemed to be a sign, a message urging me to act, to reclaim what was mine. The quiet, melancholic atmosphere of the valley began to feel charged, pregnant with a simmering, unseen energy. One particularly moonless night, I found myself drawn back to the boathouse. The willows were still, their branches hanging like skeletal fingers. The lake was a sheet of black glass, reflecting nothing. The air was thick, heavy, with an almost tangible sense of anticipation. I stepped inside, the familiar scent of damp wood and decay hitting me with a sudden, overwhelming force. It felt like stepping into a memory, a spectral echo of what once was. On the mildewed bench, precisely where she used to sit, lay a single white rose. It was perfect, pristine, untouched by the damp or the decay of the boathouse. It pulsed with an unearthly luminescence in the profound darkness, and wrapped around its stem, tied with a delicate silk ribbon, was a small rolled-up piece of parchment. My hands trembled as I reached for it, my heart hammering against my ribs. It wasn't the elegant, embossed paper of her family. It was coarse, simple, like something I might use. And the script, though delicate, was unmistakably hers. I unrolled it, my breath catching in my throat. There were only 2 words, scrawled in a hasty, desperate hand. Help me. The words were a raw, desperate plea, a lifeline thrown across an impossible chasm. They shattered the carefully constructed narrative of her willing departure, of her acceptance of her fate. They tore through the suffocating despair, igniting a spark of something fierce and terrible within me. And the answer, though vague and terrifying, was clear. I would tear down their walls. I would brave their shadows. I would fight. And in that moment, standing alone in the spectral boathouse, with Isolde's desperate plea burning in my hand, I realized the full, terrifying extent of my addiction, my obsession. It wasn't just love anymore. It was a desperate, primal need, a consuming fire that would either save us both or consume us utterly. The horror had only just begun. The two words "help me," scrawled on that simple parchment, were not just a plea. They were an incantation, a summoning. They resurrected me from the living death I had endured, infusing my veins with a cold, fierce determination that burned away the despair. The fear was still there, a constant hum beneath my skin, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was a fuel, sharpening my senses, pushing me forward into the very heart of the darkness. The white rose, still glowing faintly in the gloom, felt less like a symbol of purity and more like a beacon, a morbid marker left for me to find. It was a testament to Isolde's defiance, a desperate act of rebellion against the forces that sought to erase her. Her family, with all their wealth and influence, had underestimated her spirit, and in doing so, had underestimated me. My focus shifted. The abstract dread of Blackwood Manor coalesced into a tangible enemy, a fortress to be breached. I began to observe it with a new intensity, no longer just a desperate lover staring into the abyss, but a strategist charting a path through enemy territory. I studied the movements of the guards, the timing of their patrols, the blind spots in their extensive security system. The manor, once a symbol of insurmountable power, now seemed a riddle, a puzzle I was determined to solve. The wind, which once carried mocking laughter, now whispered secrets through the ancient pines, guiding my gaze to forgotten pathways and hidden recesses. My shack, usually a place of quiet solitude, transformed into a war room. I spread out crude maps of the estate, sketching out routes, marking potential weaknesses. The old lumber, the rusty tools, the very fabric of my humble life became instruments of my purpose. My calloused hands, once emblems of my unworthiness, were now tools of a different kind of precision, steady and resolute. Sleep, when it came, was shallow and haunted, not by despair, but by vivid, unsettling visions of the manor. Its sprawling architecture seemed to shift and writhe, its windows like predatory eyes, its shadows alive with unseen threats. I saw Isolde within its walls, a spectral figure moving through opulent rooms, her face a mask of sorrow, her eyes constantly searching, pleading. These were not just dreams, they were omens, premonitions, deepening my conviction that she was truly a prisoner, her will slowly being eroded by the relentless pressure. The days leading up to the wedding became a blur of tense anticipation. I stopped drinking. Every ounce of my energy, Every flicker of my concentration was devoted to my singular, terrifying objective. My body, hardened by years of labor, became an instrument tuned for one purpose: her rescue. The hunger in my gut was not for food, but for her presence, her freedom. I realized with a chilling clarity that this was not merely about reclaiming her love, but about reclaiming her. It was about reminding her of the courage she possessed, the defiance that still simmered beneath her forced compliance. It was about proving to her and to myself that our love was not a weakness, but a force capable of shattering the gilded cage. This realization, however, was tinged with a terrifying awareness of the precipice I stood on. One wrong move, and I could lose her forever, or worse, condemn her to a fate far more terrible than gilded imprisonment. The night before the wedding was a desolate canvas of dark clouds and a moon hidden behind a veil of mist. The air was heavy, pregnant with unspoken dread and the promise of a storm. Blackwood Manor, usually a distant glow, was now ablaze with lights, a grotesque beacon announcing the impending ceremony. Carriages and limousines, sleek and dark as beetles, began to arrive, disgorging guests in their finery, their laughter and chatter a distant, mocking hum that reached even my isolated shack. I dressed in my darkest clothes, choosing sturdy boots and a thick, dark jacket that would blend into the shadows. I packed a small bag, a coil of rope, a few tools, a knife, not for violence, but for cutting through obstacles. Each item felt heavy, imbued with the weight of my desperate mission. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs, but my hands were steady. A strange calm had descended upon me, the quiet focus of a man walking into the maw of a beast. As I made my way through the labyrinthine paths of the woods, the ancient trees, usually comforting in their familiarity, now seemed to twist into grotesque forms, their branches like skeletal arms reaching out, warning me. The rustle of dry leaves underfoot sounded unnervingly loud, each snap a potential betrayer. The air grew colder, thick with the scent of damp earth and the distant, cloying aroma of expensive flowers from the manor. I approached the estate from the northern perimeter, a section I had identified as having the least visible security, though the ground was uneven and treacherous. The sheer scale of the manor was more imposing up close, its stone walls rising like a cliff face, impervious and indifferent. The meticulously manicured gardens, with their perfectly sculpted hedges and icy fountains, felt alien, hostile. I moved like a ghost, hugging the darkest shadows, my breath shallow, my senses heightened. The security cameras were everywhere, small, unblinking eyes that seemed to follow my every move, even when I knew I was out of their range. I imagined the guards, vigilant and ruthless, their presence a constant, unseen threat. My heart pounded, a frantic rhythm against the chilling silence. I found the spot I had scouted, a crumbling section of an old stone wall, partially obscured by an overgrown thicket of thorny bushes. It was a perilous climb, the stones slick with moss and frost, but it was my only way in. Each handhold was precarious, each upward thrust a desperate gamble. The thorns tore at my clothes, raked my skin, but I felt no pain, only the burning urgency of my mission. The cold wind howled, a mournful lament, threatening to tear me from my tenuous perch. Finally, I hauled myself over the wall, dropping silently into the manicured gardens beyond. The air here was different, heavier, suffused with the oppressive grandeur of Blackwood.
The distant sounds of the gala, music, laughter, the clinking of glasses, filtered through the thick walls, a mocking symphony of their world. Now, inside the perimeter, the true horror began to unfurl. The gardens were not just beautiful, they were a maze designed to disorient and trap. Statues of grim-faced figures stood sentinel among the hedges, their eyes seeming to follow me, their stone smiles fixed in an eternal knowing sneer. The shadows here were deeper, more alive, shifting and writhing as if infused with unseen entities.
I felt a palpable sense of unease, as if the very ground beneath my feet whispered warnings. I knew Isolde's room was on the second floor, facing the east, overlooking the rose gardens. It was a detail she had mentioned once, a long time ago, a fleeting comment about the dawnlight. It was a thread, fragile but vital, in my desperate plan. Navigating the estate's exterior was a nerve-wracking dance between light and shadow. I skirted the main reception areas, moving along the quieter, more secluded wings, each step a calculated risk. The windows, large and numerous, offered glimpses into their world. Glittering chandeliers, sumptuously dressed guests, servants moving with silent efficiency. It was a world of flawless surfaces and hidden depths, a world designed to crush any intrusion. I reached the eastern side of the manor, where the rose gardens, now dormant and skeletal under the winter sky, stretched out below. Above me, a series of windows, dark save for a faint internal glow. I scanned them, searching for the one that fit her description, the one that felt like hers. And then I saw it, a single window, distinct from the others. Not just a faint glow, but a flicker, as if a candle burned within. And then a shadow, brief and indistinct, passing across the pane. Isolde. My heart surged with a desperate hope, pushing away the creeping dread. She was here. She was waiting. The climb to her window was even more challenging than scaling the wall. There were trellises, intricately wrought, but old and brittle. I tested each rung, each delicate scroll of ironwork, praying it would hold my weight. The wind whipped around me, a cold, insistent hand, trying to dislodge me. I could hear the distant strains of a waltz, the elegant music a stark contrast to my desperate, grimy ascent. As I neared her window, I saw it more clearly. The flicker was from a solitary candle, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls of her room. The shadow that had passed earlier was undeniably hers. She was there, alone, waiting. I reached the ledge just below her window, pressing myself against the cold stone. The glass was thick, but I could hear a faint, almost imperceptible sound from within. A muffled sob, or was it just the wind, playing tricks on my overwrought senses? I peered inside. The room was grand, draped in heavy fabrics, ornate furniture. But it felt cold, empty. And there, by the window, stood Isolde. She was still in her bridal gown, its pristine white, a stark, almost violent contrast to the dark shadows that clung to her. Her hair was down now, cascading around her shoulders, and her face, illuminated by the single candle, was utterly ravaged. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her cheeks streaked with tears. She held a small, delicate object in her hand, twisting it, her knuckles white. It was the white rose, the twin to the one she had left for me. She looked utterly broken, a porcelain doll shattered by an unseen blow. The sight tore at my soul, burning away the last vestiges of my self-doubt. This was not a willing participant. This was a captive, a victim of her family's ruthless machinations. I tapped lightly on the glass, a hesitant, almost imperceptible sound. Her head shot up, her eyes wide with terror. Then, slowly, they focused on my face, pressed against the pane. For a moment, a flicker of pure, unadulterated hope ignited in their amethyst depths. A gasp escaped her lips, quickly stifled. She rushed to the window,
fumbling with the latch. It was old, stiff, designed to keep the elements out, or perhaps to keep her in. Her fingers trembled, her movements jerky with frantic urgency. The metal grated, a sharp, piercing sound in the oppressive silence of the room. Finally, with a soft click, it opened a fraction. The cold air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of pine and damp earth, a stark intrusion into the perfumed air of her room. "Elias," she whispered, her voice a raw, choked sound, barely audible. "You came." Her eyes, filled with a desperate blend of relief and fear, searched mine. She was thin, fragile, her beauty dimmed by sorrow. Yet in that moment, she was more beautiful, more real than she had ever been. "I told you I would," I murmured, my voice hoarse with emotion. "Help me open it wider. We don't have much time." She nodded, her hands joined mine, pushing against the heavy frame. The window groaned, protesting, but slowly, inexorably, it yielded. As it opened, a gust of wind extinguished the candle, plunging the room into near darkness. Only the faint, distant glow of the gala lights now pierced the gloom, painting long, distorted shadows on the walls. In that profound darkness, with the sounds of her world faintly echoing from below, a new kind of horror settled over me. It wasn't just the fear of discovery, of capture, of violence. It was the crushing weight of the impossible choice laid before us.
"Elias," she whispered again, her voice a fragile, broken thing, as if speaking my name was an act of profound vulnerability. Her fingers, cold and trembling, laced through mine, a desperate anchor in the swirling chaos. The grand room behind her, now a cavern of shifting shadows, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a mausoleum. The faint music from the gala below, a distant, mocking waltz, underscored the terrifying urgency of the moment. "Elias," I breathed, my own voice raw. "You have to choose. Now. They will be looking for you." Her eyes, wide and luminous in the darkness, darted around the room, then back to me, filled with an agonizing indecision. I could almost see the battle raging within her, the weight of duty, the generations of expectation, the fear of their wrath, pitted against the desperate hunger for freedom, for a life unburdened by the cold, calculating hand of Blackwood. The choice was not merely between two men, but between two worlds, two destinies, one gilded and suffocating, the other uncertain, dangerous, but perhaps truly alive. "I can't," she choked out, her grip tightening on my hand, her knuckles white. "Elias, I can't. My father, my mother, they'll destroy everything. They'll ruin us both." Her voice was a terrified whimper, the spirit I had seen in her note seemingly extinguished by the immediacy of the terror. A cold dread seeped into me, colder than the night air. Was this it? Had I come all this way, risked everything, only to find her utterly broken, unwilling to take the leap? The creature in my chest, which had transformed into a burning resolve, now felt like it was crumbling, leaving behind the familiar, hollow ache of despair. My own fear of losing her, of being unworthy, began to reassert itself, an insidious whisper in my ear. "She's right. You are not enough. This is her world, not yours." Just then, a faint sound drifted from the hallway outside her room, a murmur of voices, then a distinct, heavy tread. My blood ran cold. They were coming. Isolde heard it too. Her eyes widened, a primal terror seizing her. She snatched her hand back, pressing herself against the window frame, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. "They're here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You have to go, Elias, now." My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. Leave her? After all this? After her desperate plea? The thought was an agony, a betrayal of everything I had fought for.
but the voices in the hall were closer now, distinct, urgent. Isolde, my dear, are you in here? A woman's voice, smooth and sharp as polished ice. Her mother. I had a split second. To flee, to save myself, and leave her to her gilded prison, or to stand, to fight, and risk both our lives. The choice suddenly was mine as much as it was hers, and in that terrifying moment, something within me snapped. The obsession, the dependency, the profound insecurity that had always plagued me dissolved, replaced by a pure, untainted love, a love that sought not to possess, but to free, a love that demanded courage, not just from her, but from me. I gripped the window frame, pulling myself further into the room, my body a dark silhouette against the dim light. No, I said, my voice low and firm, resonating with a newfound strength. I won't leave you, not now, not ever. Isolde stared at me, her eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and a fragile, burgeoning hope. The doorknob turned. There was no time for subtlety. I reached for Isolde's hand, pulling her towards the open window. Come with me, I urged, my voice a fierce whisper. Now, Isolde, choose, us or them. Her mother, Lady Eleanor Blackwood, swept into the room, followed by her father, the formidable Mr. Blackwood, and Lord Alistair, his face a mask of concern and barely concealed anger. The sight of me, grimy and disheveled, half in and half out of Isolde's window, brought them to a stunned halt. Their faces, usually composed and imperious, contorted in a mixture of shock, outrage, and profound disgust. Lady Eleanor let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her throat. Mr. Blackwood's jaw clenched, his eyes, dark and cold, fixing on me with an almost murderous intensity. Lord Alistair, ever the picture of controlled disdain, merely narrowed his eyes, a silent, chilling threat. Isolde, her mother shrieked, her composure shattering. Get away from that person.
Isolde flinched, but she didn't recoil from my grasp. Her gaze met mine, a silent, agonizing question. This was it, the precipice, the moment of truth. I held her gaze, my own eyes pleading, demanding, choose yourself, choose us, choose freedom. A profound transformation swept over her. The terror in her eyes did not vanish, but it was eclipsed by a flash of defiance, a spark of the proud, resilient spirit that had left me that desperate note. Her shoulders straightened, her chin lifted almost imperceptibly. She was no longer just the trapped bird. She was a woman on the verge of flight. He is not that person, Mother, Isolde said, her voice trembling but clear, resonating with an unexpected strength. He is Elias, and I am leaving with him. The words hung in the opulent air, shattering the silence, piercing the carefully constructed facade of their world. Lady Eleanor gasped again, a sound of utter horror. Mr. Blackwood's face darkened, a storm cloud brewing behind his cold eyes. Lord Alistair took a step forward, his hand clenching into a fist. Isolde, you are being utterly ridiculous, her father thundered, his voice laced with venom. This is madness. You will destroy everything. Our name, your future, your mother's health. You have already destroyed my future, Isolde retorted, her voice gaining power, a tremor of pure fury entering her tone. You have already destroyed me. You have built a cage of gold and called it love, and you expect me to live within it, to become another one of your possessions. She looked at Lord Alistair then, her gaze unwavering. I will not marry you, Lord Alistair. I cannot. Abernathy, the lawyer, suddenly appeared behind them, his face unreadable. He had been lurking, I realized, anticipating this very moment. Isolde, darling, think of what you are doing, Lady Eleanor pleaded, her voice now a desperate wail. Think of the shame, the scandal. You will have nothing. He has nothing.
Isolde finally turned her full attention to her mother, her eyes blazing with a newfound resolve. "Then I will have nothing," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But I will have myself. And that, mother, is more than I have ever had in this house." And with that, with a strength I had only ever dreamed she possessed, Isolde placed her other hand over mine, and together we pulled.
She swung her leg over the window ledge, her white bridal gown tearing against the rough stone, a sound like ripping silk, a sound of breaking chains. Abernathy, ever swift, made a move towards the window, but Mr. Blackwood, his face a mask of cold fury, held up a hand. "Let them go," he bit out, his voice low and menacing, his eyes fixed on Isolde with a look of utter disownment. "She has made her choice. She is no longer a Blackwood." The words, meant to be a final, crushing blow, instead felt like an unexpected liberation. We tumbled out of the window, Isolde landing lightly beside me on the narrow ledge, her gown a stark white against the gloom. The drop was not far, only a few feet to the ground below, but it felt like a leap into an entirely new dimension. We ran. We ran through the manicured gardens, the thorny rose bushes tearing at Isolde's gown, snagging her hair. The cold statues seemed to watch, their stone eyes following our desperate flight. We ran past the dark, silent pools, their surfaces reflecting the ominous glow of the manor, now a distant, receding threat. We heard shouts behind us, the barking of dogs, the frantic footsteps of guards. The horror was no longer psychological, it was visceral, a terrifying chase for freedom. My calloused hand never left Isolde's. She was surprisingly fast, her bare feet, once accustomed only to polished floors, now pounding against the frozen earth with fierce determination. Her tears were gone, replaced by a grim resolve. With every stride, every breath of cold, free air, she shed the layers of her old life, leaving them behind like discarded skins. We plunged into the shadowed embrace of the ancient pines, their boughs like welcoming arms, their needles of familiar comfort. The chase intensified, the sounds of pursuit closer now, the beams of flashlights cutting through the darkness. But we knew these woods, these hidden paths, these secret hollows. This was my world, and now it was hers too. We ran until our lungs burned, until our legs ached, until the sounds of pursuit faded into the distant hum of the forest. We found refuge in a small, forgotten cabin, tucked deep within the woods, a place I had discovered years ago, untouched and hidden. Inside, the air was cold and damp, but it was ours. In the flickering light of a match, I saw her. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, her gown ripped and stained, her hair a wild, beautiful mess. But her eyes, those deep amethyst pools, now held a light I had never seen before, a fierce, defiant joy. "We did it, Elias," she whispered, her voice hoarse, but filled with an incredible lightness. "We are free." I pulled her into my arms, holding her close, feeling the fragile beat of her heart against mine. The old fear, the dependency, the crushing insecurity had finally been vanquished. I was not just her rescuer, I was her partner. And she, in her courageous act, had not just saved herself, but had also irrevocably saved me. I had loved her obsessively, addictively, always fearing I would lose myself in the intensity of it. But in the act of helping her find her own courage, I had found mine. The scars of that night, of the toxic love and the bitter struggle, would remain. The memory of Blackwood Manor, of its cold power, would linger like a phantom limb. But the chains were broken. They had tried to define her by her name, by her wealth, by her duty. They had tried to define me by my poverty, by my unworthiness. But we had defied them. We had chosen a different path, a path carved not by privilege or expectation, but by courage, by sacrifice, and by a love that had finally learned to breathe. Months passed.
The cold grip of winter softened, giving way to the tentative green of spring. We built a life, slowly, deliberately, with our own hands. We lived simply, working the land, finding joy in the quiet rhythms of nature. Isolde, with her delicate hands, learned to plant seeds, to mend clothes, to cook over a fire. Her skin, once so pale, gained a healthy glow from the sun and wind. Her laughter, once a distant, ethereal sound, now rang out clear and true, unburdened by the echoes of her past. She never spoke of her family, not directly, but sometimes, in the quiet evenings, her gaze would drift towards the distant valley, towards the faint, shimmering glow of Blackwood Manor, a dark, hulking presence on the horizon. A flicker of pain, of longing would cross her face, a reminder of the life she had left behind, the price she had paid for freedom. But it was always fleeting. She would turn back to me, her hand finding mine, her eyes filled with a profound peace that had been absent for so long. And I, Elias, learned to love her not as a fragile bird I desperately needed to hold on to, but as a soaring spirit, free and strong, choosing to share her flight with me. My love was no longer a desperate addiction, but a steady, nurturing flame.
I understood now that true love was not about losing yourself in another, but about finding a stronger, more authentic self alongside them. The horror of Blackwood Manor and its suffocating grasp had not vanished from the world, but its power over us had. We carried our scars, yes, as testaments to the battles we had fought, the choices we had made, but we were no longer bound by them. We were free. And as the sun rose each morning over our humble home, casting long golden shadows across the valley, I knew with a quiet certainty that a hard-earned peace, a liberating and mature love, had finally bloomed in the shadow of the manor.